Good morning. Thank you so much for coming out here today. It is amazing to see such beautiful smiling faces back at me, especially so early on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much for coming out. It's brilliant. My name is Kathleen Clark. I'm the Business and Operations Manager at Labour List, and I've been asked to chair this wonderful panel. I'm very excited. This is going to be a great panel, and everyone here made the right decision by coming to this panel, because this panel is going to be better than all the others, and that's a guarantee. I could speak about education. I think education is one of those things where everyone has an opinion about education because everyone has been through education. Even if you were educated abroad, even if you dropped out of school, everybody has an opinion. I could sit all day and give you mine, but quite frankly, they're very boring. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ask everyone on this panel to introduce themselves, like I have done, and then we will take some remarks from Seema who sits on my left. I'm going to go over to Dr. Mary Bousted, who's going to tell us a little bit about herself in just a minute.
Hello, I'm Mary Bousted, and I was Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union until the end of August. I am now a visiting professor at the Institute of Education, University College London, and I'm working as an education consultant and commentator.
Brilliant, thank you. On my left, Seema.
Thanks very much. I'm Seema Malhotra. I'm the Shadow Minister for Skills and Further Education. I'm the Labour and Co-op Member of Parliament for Feltham and Heston, the founder and president of the Fabian Women's Network, and have just come off the Fabian Executive after 24 years, and very proud to now be a Fabian Vice President. And also, I would say, the founder and chair of a local education charity. Thank you.
But apart from that, she does absolutely nothing. No, just kidding, of course. Ben on my right.
I'm Ben Cooper. I'm Research Manager at the Fabians, and I mainly lead on the Fabian Society's public services and election attitudes and election approaches for the Labour Party work.
Brilliant. And then Kieran?
Morning, everybody. My name is Kieran Mayhill. I'm a school leader in a secondary school in Tower Hamlets. So I've been an educator for over a decade. I'm also, like to say, I'm a mum, an educator and an activist because I passionately believe that we can educate our children much better than we are. And I'm also the National Secretary of Labour Women's Network.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to a wonderful panel. So much experience, and I think somebody famous once said, education, education, education. So maybe we'll learn a little bit about that today. I'm going to ask everyone on our panelists, they know in advance, they've got a few minutes to speak. I'm going to ask them to go up to the podium, and then we're going to do questions in groups of 3. Please think of your questions now, and we will try and get through as many as we can. We've only got a certain amount of time here, so let's make the most of it. So I'm going to start by asking Seema, would you mind go first? If you go over, I'll give you a little signal, but people are desperate to hear what you want to say, so when you have a minute, take it away.
Great. Great, thank you so much, and I want to also thank the Fabian Society for what is clearly an absolutely fantastic conference this morning, and I'm so delighted to be here today at the flagship New Year conference, and really to say a thank you to the Fabians also for all that you do. I will, in my remarks today, be talking mainly about adult skills DEFI and some of our plans, because I know that we've got a great panel and also able to cover the other areas around the education challenge. But I will touch a little bit on schools, because there is relevance for the post-16 education in terms of what happens before as well. But I want to start by reiterating a message that Bridget Phillipson gave in her speech last week. And that is that one of the myths that we share today in England is that the government educates our children well. That's important because as we're starting the new term in so many schools and so on, and nearly 14 years into this government, it's actually no longer true. And it hasn't been true for far too long. That's why it's our job as the Labour Party to set out in 2024 as we did a generation earlier, that change is urgent, change is pressing, and Labour is ready to deliver the change that we need. You could say that education, education, education is back. Now, the recent work of the Centre for Social Justice, that more than 1 in 4 parents think that sending children to school every day doesn't matter, is really a serious message. We know that alongside this, the education gap is widening again for children starting primary and leaving secondary. We know that fewer 16-year-olds are achieving 5 good GCSEs, certainly by 2019, than they were in 2012. We saw the school rebuilding programme cancelled, buildings silently left to rot. We've seen that standards first rising as the impact of Labour's reforms were felt right through the system, then stagnated and now are falling. We know that we have a curriculum that narrows and doesn't broaden children's experiences and opportunities, where the pursuit of high standards has become too often synonymous with joylessness when nothing of the sort need be true. We know that we have worsening staff shortages at every stage, from initial teacher training and support staff recruitment through to the retention of great teachers. And that challenge goes through our schools and into our FE and HE system. Now, the 2 truths Bridget also spoke about are important, and they are ones that we will continue to talk about in months and years indeed to come. The first is that good governments do good in education, and that can take a while to be seen. And the second, that is also really important, is that schools can't solve societies or indeed education challenges themselves. Now, as the Shadow Minister for Skills and FE, my focus, and indeed for government, now and for government, is how we reform our skills system so that people can gain new skills, access better jobs, and indeed grow our economy. Under the Conservatives, there has been over a decade of decline in skills and training opportunities that is now also making Britain poorer. We know that as a nation, our number 1 priority for Labour has to be to grow our economy. But we cannot grow our economy without investing in our people and without a proper plan for skills. The decade of decline in skills and training opportunities is making Britain poorer, and the consequences are clear. Businesses are unable to fill their job vacancies, and they're being held back by people not having the skills that they need. Our public services, like the NHS, have growing skills shortages, and the government has failed to produce any sort of workable plan. And as just one illustration, the increase in net migration last year, which was fuelled by an increase in health and care visas of around 150%. If the government share Labour's ambition to upskill our workforce and create opportunity, the central question would be why funding for the new social care workforce pathway was halved in spring 2023. The shortage indeed of social care workers is then contributing in turn to bed blotting in our NHS. So on the Conservatives' watch, it's no surprise that apprenticeship starts have plummeted, with 200,000 fewer people starting these training opportunities. SME engagement with apprenticeships have dropped. Over 11 million adults lack the basic digital skills needed in our economy. And currently, and crucially, the UK is ranked 6th in the G7 for the number of people whose highest qualification is above A-level standard but below degree level standard. That crucial missing middle of important level 4 and level 5 qualifications. We as a nation have failed in adult skills, and it is time to turn that around. That's why our investment in education and skills needs new plans and new structures. But it won't happen without partnership. The state working in partnership with business and with industry, with our unions and with our workforce. Our industrial strategy won't be delivered without a focus on skills. and that focus needs to be at the heart of government. That's why we will be first creating a new national body, Skills England. It will oversee our national effort to meet the skills needs of the next decade. It will be overseeing new courses, indeed, and increased access to learning. Skills England will oversee a list of new approved courses on which businesses can more flexibly spend their levy money, developed in collaboration with devolved authorities, local authorities, businesses, unions, and wider experts. This includes modular courses in priority areas that lie at the core of our industrial strategy, including digital skills, green skills, social care and childcare, that will boost training opportunities in our communities with a view to supporting our national ambitions, such as transition to net zero. Thirdly, devolution. The days of the centre knowing the best, always knowing the best, are over. We will devolve power and budgets for skills and adult education to our combined authorities, ensuring the right decisions and the right priorities are taken by the right people in the right places. And we will develop a network of technical excellence colleges, empowering education providers with local businesses, HE, employers, and unions to support colleges to specialise in what their areas need, specialising in many ways for the first time, and to work with local industry to design and deliver courses which meet local skills needs and employer priorities in local areas. Labour will help the further education sector to respond to local skills needs and make technical education again a much more attractive pathway on a par with universal education, and look at how we support more flexible pathways from school through FE and into HE so that lifelong learning becomes a proper opportunity for all. So I will just close by saying this, that alongside what we will do to support our teachers with 6,500 more qualified expert teachers for our children, with looking at how we resource speech and language interventions that start early, with looking at how we reform and bring in 1,000 new careers advisors, with how we make proper work experience, again, an opportunity for all our children. We should always have a note of optimism, because with that one myth and our two truths, we know that there is a great opportunity for a Labour government to once more, again, transform education and opportunities for our young people and adult alike. A change that we can deliver to reverse a decade of decline, to have a new hope and a new belief that once again we can see high and rising standards for our children and our adults too, a culture of lifelong learning as well, that the economy of the future also demands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seema. Just while Ben prepares his remarks and gets ready to go up, I just wanted to touch on the point that you've made. I know obviously you're just sitting down now. Absolutely fascinating to hear about the commitment you can make towards having new teachers and bringing in new teachers, but also the policies that go behind that, and how, of course, we can move forward with these skills that young people, or indeed adults that are retraining, must learn to obviously not alone understand the problems of today, but combat the problems of tomorrow. And on that note, Ben, when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm going to focus my opening remarks on early years because of the significant benefits of doing so. I'm sure most of us in this room know that if we tackle the challenges that open up in early childhood, there are significant benefits when it comes to educational, economic and social outcomes. And this is something that the Fabian Society has recognised throughout its 140 years of work and history. Now, I guess most of us will know that poor children are falling further behind their richer peers. Indeed, the gap between rich and poor when it comes to early years has now opened up to 5 months, and it is the highest since 2014. Most of us will probably recognise that the pandemic has obviously had a significant impact. I'm sure some of us have seen the stories of children arriving at school wearing nappies, unable to use knives and forks, or communicate with their teachers. But I think it's important to stress that even before the pandemic, the education attainment gap was opening up. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, poverty. So 1 million children under 5 now live in poverty, and we've seen significant and harsh cuts to social security, which have had a real impact on educational attainment. 2, austerity. And all of us will be aware that over 1,000 children's centres have been closed, and actually spending per young person on Sure Start and other children's services fell in the most deprived areas, the places where the services are needed the most. And in fact, all 3 regions of the north saw larger falls in spending per young person on early years services, while the southeast saw an increase. And then finally, poorly targeted investment. The government, after closing 1,000 Sure Start centres, realised that perhaps they made a little bit of a mistake and decided to invest £300 million in family hubs. Now, there are real problems with it, not least because Sure Start was for the under 5s. Family hubs are for those from 0 to 19. But it's part of a broader picture where funding is being moved away from our youngest and poorest children towards those who are maybe better supported in schools and youth services if they exist. But also childcare funding is actually contributing to a wider educational inequality, because roughly a third of funding on childcare goes to the top half of people, whereas 20% of childcare funding goes to those on the lowest incomes, those who benefit from childcare the most. And indeed, the recent expansion that is just coming in to play this year will make things worse. It's estimated that richer families will be 6 times more likely to benefit from childcare expansion than those on the lowest incomes. And because the free hours are underfunded, what you will actually see is low-income families subsidising the hours of richer families, and those on the lowest incomes will simply not be able to afford it and therefore will not benefit. So how can we change this? Because obviously this is not necessarily a conference around complaining. This is a conference around how do we make things better. And you won't be surprised to learn that the Fabians have many ideas on how we can fix the early years setting. So let's first deal with what do you do with family hubs? Well, firstly, what we're saying is the system does not need another overhaul. What we should do is use the infrastructure of family hubs, expand it, but change from 0 to 19 to 0 to 5. It removes the disruption, it prevents the disruption, but it means that we can direct those services to the early years as part of a universal entitlement to the support that every family from 0 to 5 requires. On childcare, I'll accept it's slightly more tricky because we do need substantial investment in childcare provision. But what we've recommended is that actually we should dedicate all or as much childcare funding to those on the lowest incomes. There are certain schemes on childcare that are targeted more to higher income families, and perhaps we should be redirecting the funding to make sure that those on the lowest income can afford childcare. But I think what's also crucial, we spend a lot of time talking about entitlements, but it's no good talking about entitlement if there isn't the childcare providers there for children to actually go to. And what we've recommended is that because childcare is an incredibly local service, that councils should be given more powers to directly commission and shape childcare so it can be combined with transport, housing, jobs, to make sure that not only do children benefit from a high quality childcare service, but the parents do as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. One thing that, just to pick up on while our next speaker gets ready, is you said, perhaps the government made a mistake. What a lovely way to summarise 14 years of government. Perhaps they made a mistake. You can tell he's a research manager because he's obviously too lovely for my job especially. But no, absolutely, I mean, very clear. I think also the point you made on childcare was completely right. And I know we're talking about skills, but actually all of these policies and all of these topics do actually go hand in hand. And with that, I pass us on to our next speaker.
Thank you ever so much. So I'm going to base my remarks on how schools have a role here, particularly how schools can be the institution that helps to unlock that potential of our children and young people everywhere and for every single one of them. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 things to make it easy and hopefully to make it stick. They're all going to begin with P. That might be the teacher in me. So the 3 Ps that are about human potential will be people, pride in place, and poverty reduction. And my argument is, without those 3, schools really can't do what we want to do to make sure that every child gets the best start in life. So if we start with people, I'm not going to set out the case for why public services really need people. I think that Benjamin Zephaniah, in his poem, People Need People, really does that more beautifully than I can. We talk about our set text for our young people quite a lot, but I think this poem should be a set text for any politician who wants the keys to our public services, because we ultimately really need people. So when we're thinking about the people in our schools, yes, teachers, but ultimately, I think there is a role for wider professionals within our schools as well. We are really fortunate in the school that I help to lead that we do have on-site school counsellors. I know that's a policy proposal of Labour. We have them on site. We also have an on-site school social worker. Now, these are the places where those relationships can really be built in a safe and trusting way, and I'd like to think that schools can open those doors to wider professionals. When we're also thinking about people in schools, maybe Mary will be talking more about kind of teacher and teacher morale, and yes, it's important that there is a plan to deal with teacher recruitment and retention. But I also want to make the case that we need to think about wider support staff in schools too. While I'm here, I want to give a shout out to our school librarian, who's absolutely fantastic. Now, yes, she does ignite young minds and has a great selection of books, but she also noticed things that a self-service checkout can't. So when a particular student started to ask for large print books, and whether it was possible to order some in, that obviously got our librarian thinking, why might this be? Now, we did the usual things, talked to the form tutor, pass it on, and a number of weeks went by, and we didn't there wasn't really a change. The young person kept going to the library, wanted large print books. Now, that was passed on to the head of year, contact was made with the family, it revealed wider pressures that family were in, and school played a role in sorting out an optician's appointment, and now that young person has the glasses that she needs. Now, that would not take place without people caring for people, and that's really important. Yes, schools are there to provide the academic support for our young people, but there's a wider role that I think we can talk about and should champion too. Now, pride in place is really important for me. I grew up maybe this is why Benjamin Zephaniah is important to me. I grew up in Handsworth in the West Midlands, and the narrative there was if you wanted to make something of yourself, you had to leave. There wasn't much pride in place. It's only later in life when I've discovered that there's actually quite a lot going on in Handsworth and Birmingham to be proud of. Now, I think there's a role for curriculum reform. I'm a history teacher. I think local history needs to be celebrated a lot more. I think, again, that's more than just a narrow parameter of the curriculum, but that's that sense of pride and belonging and what that can do. I'd like to just get us thinking about in terms of pride in place, and I don't want the conversation to go into school structures necessarily, but multi-academy trusts and MATs, I think they're interesting. So yes, absolutely. They've been very good for innovation within the sector. They've been very good for efficiencies. But I just think how far can a school be a community institution if that decision-making is further and further away from the community that is supported by the school? So pride in place, something else for us to consider. And my final point is going to be about poverty reduction. Now, we heard that schools cannot be understood in isolation, okay? We as a country have the highest income inequality in any comparable European country. And we need to recognise that, yes, there might be a plan for education, but it's going to fall short in unlocking every young person's potential unless we are serious and have a serious government that has a plan to reduce poverty. When I started in schools over a decade ago, when I opened my first classroom door and it was all very trepidatious, what's going to happen here, I entered the classroom and I saw lots of faces in front of me, and there were hungry hearts there. There were young people who are hungry for learning, hungry to grow, hungry to succeed. Now, that ambition remains, absolutely, but it has become harder for our young people to realise that, because actually a lot of them are now just hungry.
Yeah.
And that's the heartbreaking reality, that schools will not be able to unlock the potential of every young person unless we are serious about reducing poverty. It is the only way that potential can be realised for everybody, and most importantly, it is the Labour way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also, such complex ideas, sometimes it's quite difficult to get a grip on what is quite a tough and a very big topic of discussion. But actually, people, pride in place, and poverty reduction is a fantastic way to summarise and to clearly communicate those very important values, and actually very difficult conversations to have, I think. Everything she mentioned is not an easy conversation to have, but nevertheless done quite well with those points. No wonder she's a teacher. No wonder. Anyway, last but not least, someone I'm very, very excited to introduce, Dr. Mary Bousted.
Thank you. So I got asked a question to answer, and as a good teacher and pupil, I am going to answer the question. And the question I got asked to answer was, Labour has pledged to raise educational standards for every child, and sorry, I'm recovering from COVID, and revitalise adult skills. What will it need to prioritise to do this? So I am going to answer the question and give what I think are 3 priorities. But in listening to the panel, I'm going to say 2 more things as well, because I think the speeches so far have been so rich and so fantastic. So the main point I want to make is Labour will, in government, have to do what Labour always has to do, which is clear up a huge mess. There is so much to do that Labour will have to prioritise. So what should those priorities be? And if we're talking about education, I think one priority has to be the workforce, because quite simply, as Kieran says, we're running out of teachers. The numbers are awful. The government missed its recruitment of secondary teachers this year by 41%. It's been a fall of 23% in initial teacher training recruitment in 2022 compared with 2021, a 23% fall in 1 year. And it's only government met its targets once in the last 12 years. So we're not recruiting teachers, and that catastrophe in recruitment is compounded by an exodus from the profession. So, the numbers are awful. More teachers left the profession for reasons other than retirement in 2021 to 22 than at any other year on record. 1 in 4 teachers leave within 3 years. A third leave within 5 years. And the effect on schools is profound, because what it means is the supply into more experienced teachers who go into middle management, who can support younger teachers, who can help them in a job which is incredibly stressful and intense, can help them realise what's important, what you don't quite have to do now, and how you get over these difficulties, how you manage these behaviour problems, how you make that phone call to a parent. All these things are complex things, and you need experienced teachers to help younger teachers, but those experienced teachers are hemorrhaging from our schools. And of course, the issue most about the teacher recruitment and retention crisis is that the schools in the deprived areas, where the children most need teachers who are qualified and experienced, are the least likely to get them. They find it twice as hard to recruit teachers. My subject, English, I taught English, and then I trained teachers how to teach English in 3 universities. And when I ran the PGCE English course at York, the course was full by the October half term. Now English is a shortage subject. 1 in 5 English lessons is taught by non-specialists. There are no shortage subjects. The only subjects which aren't a shortage at secondary now are classics and PE. Every other subject is a shortage subject. So that's going to be a profound issue. I think that Labour should, when it gets into power, set up a commission to look at teacher retention. What is it that we can do, particularly around the rate of intensity of work, because, and there's a lot of research on this, and I've written a book on this, but teachers' work intensity has doubled more than other professions. It's doubled since 2010. So what is it about teachers' work intensity that has made the job so exhausting? 85% of teachers say they go home exhausted at the end of every working day. That's double the amount of other professions. So what is it about teaching? The second, I'm absolutely following the last speaker, which is child poverty. The Education Policy Institute have shown in their report on grammar schools in 2016 that 40% of the attainment gap between poor children and their richer peers is created before they start school. 1 million children this year, according to Joseph Rowntree, experience deprivation. Deprivation is unable to meet their most basic needs to stay warm, to stay clean and to stay fed. And Keir Starmer has started a powerful narrative here. And he's been accused of the nanny state. Well, I think teaching children how to clean their teeth, being concerned about the fact that we are now amongst the lowest of the OECD countries for children's height, and that's tumbled, height growth has tumbled during the last 10 years, and that's down to poor nutrition for children. I think being concerned about obesity for children and stopping, having a watershed for advertising sugary and fatty foods. All that is absolutely necessary, and I think, and I don't want to put words into Keir Starmer's mouth, and who would listen anyhow, but I think that is a signalling to a different approach, which will be a much more integrated approach to tackling child poverty and child development. And I think Labour's really grasped onto something really important here. I'm really glad that Keir Starmer and Bridget and other MPs are talking about this. I think it's absolutely necessary. And the third thing I would say that Labour will have to do is they're going to have to look at SEND reform, special educational needs reform, because there's special educational needs provision is a direct casualty of the government's approach to do a needs-led system without putting the money in for the needs-led, and also a direct casualty of local authorities not being able to build schools. So now there is an absolutely really exploitative system in many local authorities, of local authorities paying huge sums, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, to educate children with low incidence but high needs in private homes, which cost an absolute fortune and which Ofsted can't regulate effectively. Ofsted doesn't have the resources to regulate those effectively. The way that the councils deal with that, local authorities deal with that, is by regulating, making the chance to get an EHCP, an Education, Child and Healthcare Plan, really, really difficult to get. So loads of cases go to special tribunals where parents win 86% of the cases, and where the only reason why more councils aren't going bankrupt is that special educational needs funding is kept off the balance sheet. But, so there is going to have to be a root and branch reform of special educational needs. And I know that Labour doesn't want to row back on academies and multi-academy trusts, and I absolutely understand that. They were established by contract law. There are thousands of different contracts. To row back on that would just be, you'd spend all your time doing that and you'd miss the more important things. But one area where I think we do need wholesale institutional reform is on special educational needs, and my simple plea on that would be that the law against local authorities setting up schools is repealed to allow them to set up local targeted special educational needs provision, which then could be provided, because the other problem is many children with low incidence but high special needs have to be educated hundreds of miles away from their homes. This isn't good for the children, it isn't good for the families, and it's absolutely bankrupting councils. So we need to look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've heard from 3 experts in their field of skills and education, and I know it's very easy to look at how bad things are and to say it's never going to improve, but I would encourage you to think that actually with the people around this table, having the opinions and experience that they have, I have taken, and I hope you take, a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity of better things to come. So we have 25 minutes left in this session. We've got to finish by 12:30, otherwise I'm going to get shouted at. But what we do now have is opportunity for questions. I will take them in groups of 3. I will do an impression of David Dimbleby, so I'm sorry if I in any way upset you. My eyesight is appalling. And I will cut you off if it's a bit too long, so just try and keep it short because we want to really rattle through all the questions. I am also going to be a bit of a feminist here and say somebody who doesn't identify as a man, if somebody could put their hand up and start with a question. Yep. And we'll do them in groups of 3, and we'll rattle on through them so that everyone gets as much opportunity to speak. And then I will ask the panellists for a very, very brief answer, and then very, very brief conclusion. And that, unfortunately, is our session. So I'm going to start. Where did you say they were? I'm going to start with the woman on the left. Do you have a pink hat on? Is that a pink? No, it's a head. Right. Okay. It looks great. I'm going to start. We have a roving mic. We should do. So hopefully that should be doable. Thank you.
Okay. I don't usually do this because it's personal.
Good start.
But I think that we as a party have got to start being personal. Not recruiting teachers. I want to, and this is relating to SEN. So I'm going to tell a little, as quickly as possible, story, and then you can respond. My husband was a member of Parliament. He had a number of strokes. He's still alive. He has dyspraxia, but he can be a member of Parliament. It's hereditary. My son has dyspraxia. It took me 14 years to get him statemented by my own local authority. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dame Sally Powell now, unfortunately. Now, my son cannot do bicycles. He can't. My husband took his driving test 45 times. His grandfather took it 60 times. They cannot do shapes. They cannot do...
I'm sorry, just for the sake of time.
No, it's important. But they can do 76 times 117 in their brain. But they're not allowed to be a teacher because they can't get a C in maths. It's shocking. He's a teaching assistant for SEN, but he can't be a teacher.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Second question, I'm going to take the man in the front row with the, yes, with the half cuts.
Hi, my name's Ollie Taylor. I work in the third sector at a social mobility charity called Upreach, and I'd love to ask a question on admission policy. So the Sutton Trust, another social mobility charity, released a report showing that for the top performing state schools in the country, they're now actually more selective than grammar schools, so that the proportion of students who are eligible for free school meals attending top state schools are lower going to comprehensive schools than potentially some of our grammar schools, which I think is shocking. Even if there's a local state school. I would love to know what the panel thinks, what can be done to ensure that our most disadvantaged students can attend the top state schools in this country, because as we said, education can be the great leveller. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. And let's do one, should we do, I know the man behind in the black t-shirt, is it a shirt, sorry, or a jumper? Yeah, sorry.
I'm Kevin Finnegan. I'm chair of Colchester Fabians, and I'm also a senior governor at the local further education college. My background is in FE. Thank you very much, panel. Really excellent talk. And I do believe that some of the transition and change does need these kind of real commissions. I think further education is on its knees in relation to the way in which, vocational training has been kicked around. What on earth is a T level? I don't mean that I don't know, but the nature of what the business and the sector is, it really does need a commission. But my question is, in '97, education was really there. It was up there. It was amongst the dialogue. I feel that education has got quieter, and I'm concerned about that. I also remember in '97 we had specific things we were going to do that were real things that people identified with in terms of class sizes and the rest of it. And I know some of this stuff does need commission. It does need looking at. It does need suspension of stuff. But where are the specifics that we really do need to march under in terms of educational reform?
Brilliant. That actually works out quite nicely. Those are good questions. Well done. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to start on the left and I'll move, classic Fabian. I'm going to start on the left and I'm going to move to the right and just have 1 minute brief answers, and then we'll go back for another round of questions. That was just a comment about me. That was not a comment about the panel. Obviously, they have their own opinions. Dr. Bousted, I will start with you.
Yeah, okay. So dyspraxia, I think that we do need to start developing a functional literacy and numeracy test which would be appropriate as an entry to teaching, because it took me 4 goes to get my maths O-level, and I ended up with CSE grade 1, and I kept doing it because I knew I wanted to be a teacher. But I could always do section A, which was do the sums, but section B, there are 6 men filling a hole in the road, and 1 man gets a broken arm, and so they've only got 5 and how long it takes. I didn't care. I didn't care. I wasn't interested in getting to the end. So we do need to look at admissions, I think. For admissions, my answer to that was you're absolutely right. Schools are becoming ever more socially stratified. I would take the admissions power away from the school. I think local authorities should run admissions, and I think local authorities should run exclusions. I think there's a perfectly good way of exercising proper democratic control over maths, which does not involve taking them all back into the local authority. I think, but you can give local authorities more power, and I think local authorities should do that. And what should be the specifics of education reform? I think Labour is working up to express those well, and I expect that we'll be hearing more about that over the course of the next few months. But I do like the message, which is we need education reform, we need curriculum reform, we need to look after our teachers, but it has to be done with rather than to the profession. And we are not getting from Labour what we've had so much of from the Tories, which is we're going to reduce local authority grants by 40%. We're going to increase child poverty on an epidemic scale. We're going to, education funding by 2025 will have increased by 3%. In the same period, in real terms, health funding will have increased by 40%. I think health funding needs to increase, but as Paul Johnson said from the IFS, a growth of 3% over 15 years does not look like a long-term growth strategy. So we're going to have to, and I know that money is going to be really, really tight. I know that. But it's clear the problem that Edinburgh's got is all public services are on their knees. The Institute for Government just released a report last week. Public services, they are now saying, are in a doom loop of underfunding, understaffing, which makes the problems that they create greater and greater. And I go back to my original point. Labour has a mountain to climb and will have to prioritise. And it has time yet, although that time is gradually getting shorter, to be really clear about what those priorities are.
Brilliant, thank you. And the point you raised as well about morale and that kind of spiral you were talking about is I think really interesting and not often mentioned. Is these teachers and these people that have spent a lot of time in their lives helping education and understanding education and working in the field. A lot of who I speak to on a frequent basis, morale is on the floor, and it's not surprising. And with that, obviously, we will move to someone who will hopefully do something about that. Off you go, Seema.
Thank you. When I said a decade of decline, I meant it, because I think the discussion is really showing how we have seen decline and really that lack of hope in every stage, whether that is early years and the withdrawal of Sure Start, what that did. I think in my mind, there's a real question about what the consequences of that has been when we look at the challenges that those who are now teenagers and approaching the end of their schooling are facing in so many ways: reduced resilience, poorer health and greater poverty, increased anxiety. There is so much, and I think it is reminding us about the need to make sure that we have that investment in early years. And the issues with recruitment and retention of teachers, it's a reason why we are focused on, in a sense, dealing with the challenges, dealing with, like, you know, putting out the fires and tackling the crisis before you can even be thinking about what you then need to transform, you know, as the economy improves and as we can look to what we can do in the future. So there's no doubt it's going to be really difficult for any incoming government. And for the Labour Party, you know, we don't know how much more we're going to find out about how bad things are below the surface. But we are absolutely committed, and that's where I hope there will be an optimism about the change that a new government can bring. And that is a really important message, because I'm hearing on the doorstep, as I'm sure a lot of you are, that all governments are the same, that nothing changes, politicians are the same. That's exactly what the Tories want people to be saying, because they know their vote will come out. It's part of the sort of voter suppression that Sadiq talked about, is to not give hope that an alternative is possible. And so I do think it's really important that we focus in on what a good government can do. And if there's anything that can really highlight Keir's commitment to education, it is the fact that as one of our 5 missions, we have the education mission. It is a core part of the transformation that Labour will bring about in government. Not all overnight, nothing's going to happen overnight. Lots of change can come immediately, yes, but the deeper change will take time. But we will build those foundations from day one. But I will just come in on a couple of the points. Sally's point was extremely well made, and I will also take that back. I'm not saying that you know, there's obviously a lot of work to do, but I think it's important to relate it to the wider curriculum, because the wider curriculum is much more about the whole person being really understood and appreciated, and talents being expressed within school, so that education means more to young people going through the school system as well, and it excites them to be at school and to engage in their education. And you need a range of inputs and stimulus and people around young people in order to bring that excitement too. The point I want to make about admissions and state schools is this, that it's a really important point, because I think it's another consequence of the 14 years of failure, where you then see lower confidence in your schools for all the reasons I outlined, and the myth that we have based on, you know, selected statistics that we as a nation are doing as well as we did before, or even better. It is not true, because the foundations are weakened and people have less confidence. But one of my schools, one of my local comprehensives, was in the top 20 state schools in the recent Sunday Times piece. And they are a school that really does innovate and reach out. But what was interesting was, you know, there are particular circumstances, but it was really good to see them there. But what was interesting is the others that were in there were possibly selected for other reasons, like faith schools or some other circumstance, whereas this school wasn't. But they have had particularly innovative school leadership. But that isn't the only thing. But I think what's important is where Bridget and Keir are focused, and where I think we all feel this as politicians as well, is that we need to rebuild that ambition for higher standards everywhere, so that people have confidence in their local schools again. And I believe that can come. I believe that can come with teachers, with shifting, you know, resources back into schools and so on. And that has got to be our goal. And in terms of FE, I want to just make this point, which is that the adult skills system has never been what it should be, but it has been broken in many ways under the Tories. And spending on adult skills is not set to return even close to the level it was in 2010 until 2025. Spending on pupils in our schools is not set to return to the level it was in 2010 until 2024. So what the Tories have been doing towards the end, really, of their time, in terms of realising that things have really become that broken and starting to put some spending back in, the results of that and the spending of that isn't going to come even for some time yet. So we have to be realistic about the damage done, but also optimistic and positive in how we're going to work together as a Labour movement with the rest of the country on how we move forward.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm sorry to my other two panellists. I'm going to ask you to be brief just because I want to get another round of questions in. So Ben, over to you just for those comments.
Sure. So very quickly, in terms of admission policy, I absolutely agree with Mary that it should be taken out of the hands of school. One thing I think, obviously, it's not a Department for Education issue, but housing is what, and making sure that we have affordable social housing for disadvantaged families near the best schools, and those schools being required to take them on is really important. And then just in terms of specific, the one thing I really want Labour to do is with their Take Back Control Act and empowering local communities is to give local councils greater control over every stage of the education process, particularly for early years, but also for schools and going on.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, just to come back on that, YIMBYism is always good to mention in any panel ever. So well done you. Extra point. Pint at the end, I think, for that one. Final speaker.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat things that I agree with the panel because you've heard them. I think one thing I'd say to Sally is absolute utter exceptional levels of resilience in your family. Well done to them. I think it is a point that makes me reflect on the status that we put on teachers in the profession and the widening the roles of people who want to serve, who want to help young people, and making sure that there's routes for them to do that. On admissions, what I would say is it's interesting when we have these top lists of anything, I'm always like, what's the measure, what's the metric, what gets you in there? And I think we do need to, because we value what we measure, but we need to measure what we value. So it can't just be academic outcomes, because that's going to narrow it. And to be honest, when you speak to parents, it's one part of what they want for their children. It's not everything, but it's the only thing that our school system measures. So a plea to Labour to widen the metrics and to create that data dashboard and to think about what schools are doing to add value to that community over time would be a policy idea to take away. And on FE, yes, commissions, yes, it might need to be looked at, but to be honest, it wasn't that broken. The BTEC was a very good route for a lot of young people, and it's been ripped away from them. We had a student who, started her A-levels, it wasn't working for lots of different reasons, went on to the BTEC for more flexibility, went on to university, has been a midwife for the last 8 years. That's a success story as far as I'm concerned. So stop taking away the things that we know worked, particularly if you haven't got any experience in the system.
Can I just make one addition to that point about, this is why it's so serious about what's going on right now and why we have said that we would pause and review the further defunding, because there is a serious, very serious risk that you are pulling away the ladder from those who may get lower qualifications at school but still need to have that access into further qualifications afterwards.
Brilliant. I might get a T-shirt that says I agree with Kieran. Anyway, right, we have 6 minutes. We're going to do 3 questions and we're going to rocket through them. I'm going to ask for the man with the grey pullover. That's...
Peter Olszewski, I'm a Labour councillor in Camden, where I'm the cabinet member for finance.
Yeah, crack on. We can hear you. I can repeat it. Yeah.
I think the points that Seema opened with were really important on the broader scheme of things about enabling people to gain skills, to access jobs, to grow the economy and so on. And what the discussion has been really helpful in how that can be achieved through all the different parts that make up a child's and a young person's and an adult's education journey. What I think may also be required is a kind of, like it's more subtle as cultural change, a change in attitudes that we can foster. And I think about in Camden, those of you who are familiar with Camden, by St Pancras Station, you've got the Crick Institute, this massive iconic building full of intensely educated people, some of them paid very well. And I try to get out the message that I want people who run institutions like that and working class kids who live right next door to it in Somerstown to see it and think, I'm going to work there.
Yep.
In the way that 2 generations ago, working class kids would grow up and see, it's a bit hackney, but they'd see the pit winding gear and think that I'll work there. And they did, but it's not, it's a bit reductive. But it's giving them that opportunity, but businesses need to be open to it as well.
Yep.
And somehow to engage with them. And it's not for everyone, but we need more of that. Otherwise it becomes the exclusive preserve of those who manage to get university education, etc., in the middle class.
Brilliant, thank you. Second question, is there any, can you see a woman? Is there a woman? Can we have a woman ask a question? Yeah, brilliant one, yeah, perfect. Let's go, let's rock through. Please be brief.
My name's Rebecca, I work in EdTech, I'm also a school governor. Labour have talked about their plans for curriculum reform. Do you think we should also reform qualifications at school, so GCSEs and A-levels, bearing in mind the desire to sort of broaden the curriculum, but also bearing in mind school budgets and teacher workload?
You are my favourite, brilliant, thank you. And I'll go the one, I'll go the guy at the back with the grey, with the black glasses. Please be brief, sir. I'm sorry. And then I'll ask very briefly, we will start right and we will move left like Boris, and then we will finish.
I'm James Valentine, I'm a councillor from Bedford. I've just a question about early years, and I was very interested to hear what Ben was saying on that subject. And I would agree with him that the Labour government should move from 0 to 19, back from 0 to 5. Those are the crucial formative years for children. But you didn't actually mention the other point that since Sure Start was gradually declined under the Tories and the coalition government, we only have children's centres, which are the new version of Sure Start, about 1 in 5 areas. And would he agree with me that children's centres or Sure Start should actually be, again, a universal provision for all children in all areas? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much for being brief. Kieran?
Okay, so the point about aspirations for all, I suppose, absolutely agree, and I think that speaks to what I was trying to say about schools being kind of those community institutions as well. You've got to give the signal from the top that that's important, because we've heard how pressured it is to work in a school. But, from the school staff that I work with, it's inevitable that we obviously want the best for our young people, but I agree it should be a partnership of people coming to schools and saying this is what I can offer. I'm going to leave early years for Ben, and I'm going to speak to the question about qualification reform. Now, I understand what sits beneath that question, the idea to expand the curriculum and the offer. All I would caution is if you have been at the chalk face for the past however long, the amount of change you've had to deal with in a really unstructured, unsystematic way, that you're changing your A-levels first and then you're suddenly changing Key Stage 3 and you're changing GCSE again, and it's just not thought through, because ultimately you're not hearing the voices of the people who are actually making this change happen. So it might not just be the qualification that's needed, but I agree with the sentiment that we do need to expand the offer, because through expansion, I believe we will include more young people to be successful.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Ben?
So I'll obviously focus on the early years question. I think, yes, absolutely, that children's centres and the support they provide should be a universal service. But I think it's important to recognise that when it comes to children's centres, there's 2 types of universalism. There is every child goes to a children's centre, and then there are children's centres everywhere. Now, in the early years of Sure Start and children's centres, it was the former, so it was everyone in disadvantaged areas because of a lack of money, and to make sure that the system was bedded in before they extended it. But over time, and obviously particularly since Conservatives have come into power, children's centres where they exist have turned into places where only the very most disadvantaged get services. And what it has essentially therefore become is an incredibly stigmatising service, because families do not want to go and get absolutely legitimate support that a family, no matter whatever their income, may need, but because it is associated with having a low income, that becomes deeply problematic. So I think we need to return to the idea, at least perhaps in the first term of a Labour government, let's be confident and say there's going to be more than one, that we should be having a Sure Start children's centres, family hubs, whatever they are, focused on universal in the very most disadvantaged areas, which means, and there will be people on higher up on the income scale living in disadvantaged areas, can go to Play and Stay and other services alongside those who are the most disadvantaged, and then combine that and wrap that in with lots of targeted services, which mean if a family need additional support, no one actually, when they walk through the door, knows are they going for Play and Stay, which every family goes to, or are they going for something much more high intensity. I think that's the way that you approach family hubs, children's centres and Sure Start in the short term when there's not much cash for public services.
Brilliant, thank you. Seema?
Great answers. I'll make two brief points. Richard, agree. That's my point. And on just a point I want to make about the curriculum and assessment review, the broader point I want to make is that stability is also important, because one of the things that's going to really see the growth of those qualifications, whether it's through the apprenticeships and T-levels or other vocational education, even work experience, is the engagement also of employers and workforce. And we are now seeing less engagement, not more engagement. And why is that? It's because the government's policy making is resulting in a lack of confidence about where to spend time, what to invest in, how to work with your colleges, whether those qualifications that you're investing in now will still be there in 2 or 3 years' time. That is utterly unacceptable. And so alongside what we need to do to widen that curriculum with the curriculum and assessment review, and it is an assessment review as well, it will be important that we have stability and confidence in those qualifications, so that not only do we see the investment both from the state but also the industry in those qualifications, but then there's confidence for young people to take up those courses too. It's really depressing when you hear young people say, shall I do that qualification because I don't know if it's going to be there in a few years' time, and when I go for a job, will someone know what it is when I put it on my CV? Utterly unacceptable.
Very strong point. And just Dr. Mary?
Yes, so very quickly.
Thank you.
Two things really. First of all, I do take the point about in Camden and the Crick Institute, but I would say that I grew up in Bolton. There's no Crick Institute in Bolton. You go back to Bolton and it's a town which is decimated by unemployment and deprivation. So in order to give children that belief that they can do it, we have to start having an industrial policy and a manufacturing policy which stops the overheating of the southeast and puts the capacity to grow industry, grow manufacturing, grow new technologies in those areas, because Manchester isn't big enough to let Bolton warm up. Bolton has been decimated because Manchester's warmed up, and so we need, and in fact, an industrial policy and an industrial and manufacturing policy which spreads job opportunities around the country will be one of the most powerful ways for young people to believe that if they work hard, they've got a future and to do well. And finally, the thing about qualification reform, absolutely, it has to be measured, it has to be planned, it has to be done with. But there is, but to balance that, there is an urgency about that. So I'll give you just one more stat. We come in the OECD top of the international league table for rote memorization as a teaching and learning tool, and that's reported both by teachers and by learners. And as Andrew Schleicher, who's the head of education at the OECD, the man behind the PISA league tables, he says, rote memorization is fine for times tables. It's not fine for the higher order thinking that we need in the 21st century when there aren't easy answers. So we have to move away, and we have to do it in a measured way, but we don't have loads of time to do it because this is directly affecting the standard of education that we can provide and the ability of our education system to meet the needs of young people who will be doing many jobs in a completely different world than the one that I grew up in. I am a digital Neanderthal, which was okay when I was at the NEU because they all did it for me. I'm having to learn very hard now. We can't have young people who are digitally challenged. We can't have the young people who cannot move knowledge from one area to another. We can't have young people without excellent communication skills, the ability to work together. We can't have young people who don't have the ability to research and find. We need to build all these things into our education system. They are not there in sufficient quality or quantity at the moment. We just need to be honest about that. And that's a difficult thing for a teacher union leader to say because you're there to support your profession. But we have to be honest about where there are challenges in our current education system, and we have to be clear about how we're going to address them. And I have every confidence that Labour has that ambition and that clarity.
We also have to be clear that we've run out of time. So I'm going to say a massive thank you to our panellists, a massive thank you to the Fabian Society for putting on this event. Please become a member, please support the Fabians, they are absolutely brilliant. Please subscribe to Labour List. Could I get a bit of a thank you before you go to all our panellists, Dr. Mary Boosted, Seema Malhotra, Ben Cooper and Kieran Malley, please. Thank you. Clap it up, thank you very much.
Well done.
I was like,
You did all right. You did really well.